castrazione su larga scala, ne abbiamo parlato anche settimane scorse. I fattori sono innumerevoli, anche il telefono tenuto nella tasca. Il pericolo riguarda sia uomini che donne. Scienziati medici lanciano l'allarme, i tassi di fertilità tra gli uomini stanno crollando drasticamente. Dall'articolo, in tutto il mondo il numero degli spermatozoi maschili è in declino, un calo durato decenni che è stato alternativamente attribuito a pesticidi, metalli pesanti, obesità, potenzialmente microplastiche. Ancora più preoccupante è il fatto che il declino sembra accelerare. Secondo i calcoli di un fondatore della fertilità maschile, il numero degli spermatozoi è diminuito dal 50 al 60% negli ultimi 4 decenni. Siamo già a un'incredibile percentuale. Cibo, pesticidi, radiazione dei telefoni cellulari vicino ai genitali, fa parte dell'agenda globalista quella di porre fine alla riproduzione, direi proprio di sì. La chiamano la SpermApocalypse globale. Dimostra che l'infertilità non è più solo un problema delle donne, afferma il CEO della fertilità maschile.
Houston and Austin area.
Yeah.
So, well, Dr. Swan, I greatly appreciate you joining today. I've been following your work for I guess for about 3 years now, and I think you are solely responsible for me getting rid of all plastic and all the bad cookware from my kitchen, and probably making me sound like a crazy person when I'm around family. Following your work and listening to your podcast and interviews, I probably sound like a crazy person at the dinner table because I don't want to eat off plastic cookware or heat my food in plastic cookware. So I was curious what your family and friends think when, if you try to steer clear of all that stuff. Like, how do you approach those situations?
I don't offer advice. Well, that's actually not true. I do offer advice, but try not to be judgmental and try not to, be heavy-handed. But I do, even in a restaurant or, when eating out somewhere and I see that they're using plastic, like a plastic straw or plastic silverware or, I try to suggest, alternatives in a nice way without being heavy-handed, but just, trying to. And people are pretty receptive because this is, not rocket science at this point. It's just and I think it's getting more accepted that we should be getting rid of single-use plastic, especially. Yeah.
What about like things like air fresheners in your car or the plug-in air fresheners?
No.
I know, yeah. So I'm on board. I don't use that stuff, but
Yeah.
From my family that is not, doesn't follow, the work that you and other people do, I probably sound like a crazy person. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to use the air freshener. I'd rather just open the windows or burn essential oils or burn some sage, something like that. But it makes me sound like kind of woo woo. So what about stuff like that?
Well, I try to avoid scent, and when I'm around people who are using a lot of scent, whether it's a woman, sitting next to me on the airplane with a lot of, that's a little difficult for me because what do? You're sitting on the airplane, somebody sits down next to you, they're reeking, and it actually not a lot you can do is except maybe change your seat. But when I can, I just say, I fib a little bit and I say, well, I'm allergic to these, because some people are, right?
Yeah.
I'll say, well, I am kind of allergic, mentally allergic, but maybe not physically allergic to these smells. But, it's also like laundry detergent, you can make choices in the store. So you can buy something fragrance free and you're not losing quality. You're probably gaining quality because companies that make the effort to, produce their products fragrance free are probably aware that this is something that's better for the public. So I would say to people, when you can, without being offensive and without being a real drag, try to avoid fragrance and maybe point it out when it's not necessary. Is it ever necessary? I'm not sure. But certainly when we measured the phthalates in our population, and we asked women about whether they chose fragrance-free or whether they used fragrance, their levels were lower, definitely significantly lower if they avoided fragrance. So if that's something that you care about, and I think you should care about this, especially if you're thinking about getting pregnant or maybe are pregnant, or if you're a man, same thing goes for men, by the way, as you know, if you're thinking of conceiving a pregnancy, then you might want to make a special effort to avoid these things. Yeah,
definitely. Since you've been on all these podcasts, and I've seen you on numerous YouTube videos, has your work has there been more interest in your line of study? Have more people become on board, not necessarily in the scientific community, but just in the general population? Are people starting to wake up a little bit?
I think so. I mean, it's hard for me to judge. I don't do surveys of population opinion, but I am actually amazed that 2 years after, so our book came out in February 2021, and that got a lot of attention. And I was told, well, you'll get attention for about 3 months. Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. I can edit all this out.
You'll get attention for about 3 months. And here it is 2 years later. And my schedule isn't really much lighter. It's just like I continue to get people who are interested, ranging from podcasts like yours to people who advise companies on how they might, make safer products, and filmmakers. And there's just a lot of interest in and regulators. Actually, I've talked to congressional committees. So that's encouraging. Of course, I'm just one person, and we really need to grow this to a much, much bigger, actually international level. But there has been, in the EU, there's been actually more action than in the United States. Now, that's pretty encouraging. There's a whole army of people, who are aware of this and working on getting better regulations and getting out safer products. So I think we're going in the right direction, but probably not fast enough. Of course, that's also true of climate change, and which is related to this. So we are all concerned about a lot of things. I recognize that, COVID and climate change, and this is one other thing to put on people's plates. And sometimes that gets to be almost too much for some people. So I understand that.
I was wondering why the UK or the EU is so far ahead of the United States when it comes to government regulations and blocking chemicals from being used in skincare products. Why are they so far ahead of us?
Wow, that's a big question, John. I mean, I think it has to do with a whole history of regulation, not just these chemicals and the machinery. I think the fact that this is being handled at the higher level, at the EU level, not at the country level so much. Well, both, but the EU has taken a stand on this, that it's more, well, it's hard to ignore a statement coming out of the EU. It represents a lot of people. And so I think industry has been somewhat more responsive in the EU. But there's large parts of the world that are completely unregulated, continents, whole continents, that we have no regulation at all. So yeah, it's a big job, and a different kind of job in different countries. I'm talking to somebody tomorrow in Spain. I've talked to people in Brazil. I've talked to people in South Africa, all over the world. There are more people getting interested in this question, or these questions, I should say. And that's really encouraging. And yeah, so it's, but why the EU is better regulated than the US? I think, we had kind of a revolution, 1987, I think, with Tosca. But the chemicals that were in use at the time, and there were many, many thousands of them, and they were just grandfathered in. They would say, okay, this has been on the market for a long time. We're not going to deal with those. Okay, 17,000 chemicals. So, okay, maybe they've been on the market, but people haven't paid attention, and now we should not pay attention. So that's kind of one of the bad things that happened, and that didn't happen in Europe.
Yeah, there's like some crazy statistic that I keep hearing that America has only like 11 chemicals that are banned from cosmetics, whereas the EU has like in the thousands, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I've actually heard 11,000. That you and I could be hearing the same thing, or maybe you even heard it from me. I don't know, but whatever the numbers are, there's several orders of magnitude better regulation in the EU than in the US. That's for sure. Yeah.
That's intense. So I was curious, your book and in a lot of your interviews, you talk about the impacts that endocrine disrupting chemicals can have on boys in the womb. Why are boys more susceptible to these impacts, and how come women aren't?
That's such a great question, and I just want to mention that males are more fragile. It's not what people think, but if you look at the rate of stillbirth, fetuses that die in the womb, it's higher for males. So males die at a faster rate from the moment of conception on, probably. And if you look, of course, at the population over 80 or over 90, or, there's a huge sex difference, many, many more females. So some people have conjectured, and I think there is definitely something here, that the fact that females have 2 chromosomes, XX, and males have XY, means that there's the possibility of repair for females that's not there for males. So, but I'm not a geneticist, and you should get a geneticist on to talk about this. I think this is a fascinating, fascinating question. But we see in so many ways that males are more sensitive, not just to EDCs. I mean, after a serious disaster, natural or man-made, whether it's 9/11 or whether it's the Kobe earthquake or whether it's something else, you look at the sex ratio and fewer males are born. It's like nature is saying, not right now, let's back off for a while and stop producing so many, because this is a dangerous time. It's a phenomenon that's well known in my field. Most people are not aware of it, but and we see with COVID that males are more sensitive, and so it's true for endocrine disruptors as well. It's almost as if males have a strike against them from the moment of conception on. It's really hard to understand, but who knows why that is? That's a sort of a teleological question, but it is true often, not always, but often, that the effect of chemicals that can alter the body's hormones impacts males more. Now, as far as the chemicals I've studied the most, which is the chemicals in soft plastic and like phthalates, they have the ability to lower testosterone. So both males and females need testosterone, but for males it's particularly important, right? And it governs the development of the male reproductive system and also sex differences in the brain. So if you're lowering this critical chemical at a critical time, which is, depending on the system, for the reproductive, it's early in pregnancy, first trimester. If you're messing with that signal, then the male doesn't kind of get what he needs to fully masculinize. And that's one of the reasons why, I talk about this a lot, because I study it. It influences actually the size of the genitals, which a lot of men care about. It influences testosterone in a way that continues, and we see, problems with falling testosterone worldwide, just as falling sperm counts worldwide, which is pretty scary. You have more and more young men coming in for testosterone replacement and being seen for ED. So this is, it's all, that's all testosterone related. And so when you deal with chemicals like phthalates that lower testosterone, you're messing with a pretty important system. So that's a long answer to that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Do male testosterone levels dictate how much sperm a male produces? Or is it the other way?
So the development of the male reproductive system, is multifaceted, and part of it is testosterone, and part of it is development of the Sertoli cells, which will later become sperm cells. All of that is, we would say, correlated. They're all related. So if you lower, so things that lower testosterone ultimately, when the fetus grows up, will result in lower sperm count on average. And that's the link to that early exposure and the later sperm count seems to be this distance, which I think you've heard about and read about, which is the distance, which is called the taint or the gooch on the street, the grundle. There are all kinds of names. But this distance is simply the distance, how much space the genitals take up, right? How much real estate, right? And so in a typical male, that's going to be more than in a female, right? Because for the female, everything is offside, if you will. You don't see the ovaries, you don't see the eggs, you don't see where they were in a male. They're out there, they're hanging there, and so they're taking up room. So that distance, if that's shortened, that means that everything there is smaller, right? And that is controlled by testosterone in early pregnancy. It's really weird, isn't it? But that's so critical. It's to give the guy a good start in those first weeks of pregnancy is really important. You don't want to mess with that.
Yeah, what's scary when I read in your book is that the anogenital distance, is that the right, I guess, the scientific term?
That's good. Yeah, great. Perfect.
Awesome. I don't sound like an idiot. That distance is shrinking, like compared to today, compared to the, I guess, 1950s. That distance has shrunk
Actually, John, I wish I knew that.
Oh, okay.
I think it is, but there's no data on AGD, anogenital distance, in the 1950s. And here, not in humans. So here's a story about this little measure. For a long time, all the way back to the 1912, I think, scientists knew that in rodents, males and females, they knew about it, they knew it was important. And they knew that for females, it was smaller than in males. And it makes sense. And it's actually true for most mammals. But it wasn't used for human studies. It wasn't used for epidemiology. It wasn't used for the kind of thing I do until, in the late, like around 2000, I started to hear about this distance as something that had been looked at in animal studies and one human study, but had never related it to these exposures. So I thought, okay, what's going on here? And then I heard about phthalates, right? So a colleague of mine, John Brock from CDC, we were sitting on an airplane. We had a lot of time. And he goes, Shanna, you should look at phthalates. And I said, well, I never heard of them. Nobody heard of them. This was 2000. And why? And he said, well, everybody's exposed to them. They're, everyday products. They're very common. And in animals, they cause this disturbance of genital development, which is called the phthalate syndrome. So I was like, whoa, that's kind of big, because there aren't any other syndromes. There's not a dioxin syndrome or a PCB syndrome or a, whatever. This is singled out as important enough to give it a name like this. So I thought, okay, what is that? And so I looked at that and I studied that. And people at EPA had been publishing on this, and also the National Toxicology Program, and they were showing that specific, if you fed the mother certain phthalates in her water or in her food when she's pregnant, early in pregnancy. This is a rat. Can't feed this to humans, by the way, not ethical. But if you do this in a rat or a mouse, you see that this distance is actually shortened, measurably shortened, significantly shortened, right? And then you can see other problems with whether the testicles descend properly, not so much if the mother's exposed, and whether the scrotum is smaller and so on. And yes, this is all smaller and less developed, less moving in the masculine direction. So let's back up for a minute and let me just point out, you know this from reading this. I know you know this, but maybe your listeners don't know this, that originally, starting out, the genital tract is very simple. It's just one ridge. It's the same in males and females. You couldn't tell a male from a female if you didn't do a genetic test, right? And then in rats around day 18, in humans we don't know exactly, but somewhere in the early first trimester, there's a genetic signal to start testes to start developing, the testicles to develop, and they produce testosterone. And that starts setting things in motion. And what it does is it makes the males and female genital tracts diverge, become different. And then what will be the ovary in the female becomes the testicle in the male, and so on, right? So if you interfere with that, you're gonna end up with a boy who is not completely masculinized. And the result of that is that when he grows up and starts to produce sperm, he will have fewer sperm. And when he goes to try to have a child, he will be less fertile. So how do we know that? We know that by looking at this distance in adult men and seeing that men, and we did this and other colleagues did this, in men. It's easy to measure, by the way. You just need the little calipers, and probably a lot of people listening to this are out measuring right now. But you can, if it's shorter, then the man on average will have a lower sperm count. And infertile men will tend to have a shorter distance. So it's all kind of one package, and it's all tied to testosterone, which in turn can be influenced by these chemicals. And that's why I'm so hot on these chemicals.
So what is the distance, I guess the normal distance of this AGD? Like what is considered, a demasculine men?
Yeah, I don't want to say that, John, because I don't want to make people,
it's tough, right? Yeah, it's a tough topic.
Right, I don't want to say, but I will say that it's about 50% bigger to 100% bigger in males than females. But the other thing is that it depends on your size. If you're a big guy, you're going to have big everything. You're going to have big hands. You're going to have big ears. You're going to have, so we always talk about AGD for your body size, right? And in children, it's also related to how mature you are. So maybe were you a preemie? And because we measure babies. And so if the baby is a preemie, didn't have as much time to develop, it's going to influence that. So how old is the baby and how big is the baby? So a big baby, like an 11-pound male, is going to have a much bigger AGD than a small.
Okay.
So it's, and then there's other things that matter, but those are the primary things: the age and the size. But for an adult male, it's going to be related to body size. It may also be related to other things like race, ethnicity. We haven't really studied that very well. It may be related to other things like diet and obesity and so on. One thing we know it isn't related to, which is interesting, is that we took because it's a measure in women too, by the way. And maybe I should say a little bit about that too. But if you wonder, well, maybe different parts of the menstrual cycle will be different, right? Because lots of things are going on there. And it turned out it wasn't. It was the same throughout the menstrual cycle. So it's not something that's easily alterable. And scientists believe that the relative AGD you're born with, your AGD for your size and age, is going to stay with you for life. Just like if you're born with short hands or small feet or, small ears, they're going to stay with you relative to your body size for your whole life. And that's the way it is with AGD, as far as we can tell.
Okay.
Now, that said, we don't have, because we started measuring this in 2000, we don't have any grown adults to remeasure. And you asked whether AGD has gone down over time. Probably, because sperm count has and testosterone has, but we have no historic records of AGD in 1950.
Okay.
The only way we could get this would be, don't even know how we could get it.
I guess I was thinking you could and this is I'm not a scientist at all, but I was thinking you could measure men that are in their 80s or 70s and then compare that to every generation after and see if there's a trend. But I don't know how many men in their 80s would want you to go measure their gooch.
But it's a good idea. It's a good idea. And they've done that with testosterone, but nobody's done it with AGD. But it's a great idea. Whether we also, like I say, it doesn't change over your lifespan, but we don't know that because we've never measured it. So that's something we really, really need to do. And we're hoping to remeasure our boys that we measured when they were born and see what their AGD looks like. But it's hard to find them.
Right.
And it's hard to get them to agree to come in and be measured because it's not something you love to do, right? Probably.
Right.
But it's a really important question. And all we can do is say, well, look at the correlates. Testosterone has gone down, sperm count has gone down, fertility rates have gone down. Probably AGD has gone down. That's really all we can say. These things are correlate, but it's not the same as actually demonstrating it. And I'd love to do that.
Just so we're clear, testosterone and sperm counts in men, do those levels affect men's overall vitality, mental health?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
In what
lots of things? Yeah.
In what way? Can you briefly explain?
Muscle mass, libido. There's two really important things to guys, right?
Yeah, but
and to women too. By the way, let me just say two things about that. One is that there was a study in China which looked at workers who were manufacturing another chemical called BPA. You know about BPA. It makes plastic water bottles hard. Okay. And they found that men who were working with this in the production process actually had lower libido, had more erectile dysfunction. Okay?
Yeah.
And in our study of women, we got pregnant women and we asked them about their sexual satisfaction, their sexual frequency. And when they had higher levels of phthalates, they had lower sexual frequency and lower satisfaction. So it's libido. It's all tied to testosterone, right? So if testosterone goes down and you have all these problems, and including, this is, you probably read about, people, fewer couples getting married.
Yeah.
Fewer couples, of course, having children. Part of that is a choice. Of course, you choose not to, but why you choose not to is complicated. And how much of that choice is tied to your chemical makeup is not clear, but it's probably related to it. So it's a huge social phenomenon. And then you have, along with that, fewer children being born, and so on and so forth. So it's really big story.
Yeah, I just read an article yesterday. I think it was from the LA Times, saying that most couples these days are opting out or waiting to have children because um, of the unknown of the future. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a piece of it too. But I think as a society, especially here in America, we place a lot of emphasis on women going to school, getting educated and climbing the corporate ladder. And being a mother is not on that priority list. So the article didn't mention anything about chemical exposure. It was kind of blaming, not really blaming, but highlighting what we as a society put emphasis on. But I was wondering and kind of curious why they didn't, reference anything from a chemical perspective.
You're really asking some great questions, John. And whether a couple's or a woman's desire to to not have children, desire less interest in having children, less interested in staying home, whether that's related to chemical exposure, nobody knows. Nobody knows. And frankly, as an educated woman, I think it's a great thing that women are getting educated and are climbing the corporate ladder and so on. So I wouldn't blame chemicals for this if they played a role. But we really don't know. It's never been looked at. But we do know that as societies become more educated, as they become more urban, as women, enter the workforce, the fertility rate goes down. There's no question about that. And many people think that's a good thing. And I'm not going to put a value judgment on that at all. All I'm saying is that if a couple wants to have a child, they have, I think, a right. I think that's a basic right, that if they want to, they should have the right. And that should be not taken away by early exposure to damaging chemicals.
Speaking of the couple topic, one thing I learned reading your book is that men are also, I guess, 50 cent or 50 cent. We're 50% responsible for infertility rates or miscarriages. And I didn't know that. I guess maybe it's my toxic masculinity. I thought that, if a man can, make sperm, then we're good. It's, we can
Right.
have kids. I didn't know that, we're responsible for infertility rates as well.
That's a good thing to realize, because women carry a lot of blame and guilt, Um, if a couple can't get pregnant, the woman, and they're having sex, and he's ejaculating. So what could go wrong? It has to be her.
Right.
That's the assumption, right? And actually that's not true. As you pointed out, it's about 50-50. So in infertility cases, if you actually go for a workup, you'll find that about 1/3 of the responsibility can be, tied to the man, whether it's problems in his delivery system or with the sperm themselves. But the female, also about 1/3. And then there's about 1/3 which is unexplained. They just don't know what's causing that. So I think it's really important for. Oh, I'm so sorry for this
It's okay.
noise. I can't do anything about it.
I think I can edit some of this. I think I can edit most of it out, so it's not a big deal.
Okay. So it's important for both the man and the woman to realize that it's a joint venture and it's nobody's fault if it doesn't work. And together, maybe they can explore how to clean up their lives. By the way, cleaning up their lives to help their fertility, it's not just chemicals. I should mention this. There's a lot of things in lifestyle that affect fertility. And everything that your doctor tells you to do to improve your heart health will also improve your fertility on the average, right? So, not stopping smoking, cutting down on alcohol, losing weight, getting exercise, not being a couch potato, trying to reduce your stress. All of these things help your health, and part of your health is your reproductive health and your fertility. So, I mean, we've done studies where we asked, what do you eat? What is your diet? We've done a dietary frequency. These are questionnaires, food frequency questionnaires, and looked at those food frequency questionnaires, and couples that were using, well, this was men who were eating a Mediterranean diet, a more, heart healthy diet, had higher sperm count. Right? And we looked at stress. How many stressors do you have in your life? Whether it's a loss of a job or loss of your partner, or serious illness or moving. These are all major stressors. And the number of those was related to sperm count, right? And on. All of these things are related to sperm count. So if you want to improve, if you're having trouble, or even if you think you might be having trouble when you try, think about making a clean, safe environment for this conceptus that you're going to be creating ahead of time. Because it turns out that the sperm are produced all the time, and it takes about 70 days to produce a sperm. So in that wind-up period before the man actually produces the sperm that's going to conceive the pregnancy, that sperm can be damaged by lots of things, including these things I mentioned, as well as chemicals. So if you want to have the best chance of succeeding and having a healthy pregnancy, then try to clean up your act, a couple months beforehand. Yeah. And it will help you in other ways too. So it's a win-win situation, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting too that men can do that. We have the option of making choices to clean up our act and reduce stress, eat better, exercise. But women are kind of screwed from the get-go, right? I mean, they're born with the amount of eggs and the type of eggs from birth, and they can't change anything. Is that correct?
That's right. That's correct. And yeah, you're right. A woman is born with all the eggs she's going to have. She loses some rapidly before she's actually born, and then she can, those eggs can be damaged. Her fallopian tubes can be damaged. She can get infections, and so on and so forth. But the new sperm that are being produced by men can be healthier. So that's right, that man can, in some sense, have more control over the success. So maybe the men are more responsible.
Curious, what were the latest metrics on sperm count, infertility rates, miscarriages? Can you talk about what today's numbers are in 2023 compared to what it looked like 50 years ago? What do the numbers look like?
Oh my gosh, 50 years ago. Okay, so there have been a lot of studies on how sperm count has changed over time. And they've all, as far as I know, although there might be some small ones, but there's many of them, and they show a decline. And the question of where the decline is and in who it is and how much it is varies with the study. So we put this all together doing what's called a meta-analysis, which is a study of studies, if you will. And we published the first meta-analysis in 2017. And that was actually the trigger for the book in 2021. And what we found was that sperm count had been reduced by 50%. So back when we started in 1973, the average was 99 million sperm per milliliter. That's the concentration. 99. And then at the end of our period, which was 1970, which was 2011, I believe, it was 47. So it had dropped by slightly more than 50% over that time. Now, we were not the first people to say this. Actually, a very important study came out of Denmark in 1992 that said pretty much the same thing. We just included a lot more studies and did it using methods that had not been available in 1992. So more modern methods, right? But It was very solid, and most of the data in that paper was from Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand, because that's where the studies were done.
Mm.
So that left half the world not represented, really, with very few studies. So that paper was limited in some sense by the scope, the geographic scope. But it was what was available. And so we did it again recently, and that just came out a few months ago. And what we found was that these other continents, which was Asia, Africa, and South America, had published more studies enough to be able to look at them and say, yes, there is a significant decline in those continents as well. So that was a big breakthrough everywhere. The other thing is that the rate seems to be increasing. So instead of dropping, around a little over 1% per year, since 2000, the drop is over 2% per year. So it's accelerating, which is not a happy situation. Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah.
In your book, you mentioned that Homo sapiens meet the criteria for becoming or for getting on the endangered species list. Can you talk about that? Is that still accurate?
Yes, although nobody is putting them there.
Right, right. Understood. Understood.
Yeah, but their habitat is being destroyed in a way that which we know is very critical to non-human species. Fertility rates are going down and so on. I think it's not likely that we're going to get on an endangered list anytime soon, but I think we need to be aware that it is a threat. It is a threat. And other endangered species have gone extinct. That's not that I'm saying that humans are going to go extinct, but it's something we should worry about. And, our signals for declining fertility have come always from the animals first. So Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, it was about the birds, it was about the Great Lakes, the animals there. And then we took it personally, if you will, and started looking at humans. So I think we have to take our signals from other creatures on the planet that we share the planet with. And there's no reason to think that they would respond differently than us. I mean, fertility rates are going down in lots and lots of species, including humans. So people say, oh, well, that's fine. We have too many humans, or that's fine. People choose this. Yes, but you can't say that about the alligators and the frogs and the other animals, that are having their numbers reduced. They're not choosing this. They're not choosing to delay childbearing. They're not using contraception. And so I think the more we think of ourselves as fellow planet mates, if you will, with these animals and subject to the same risks, I think the more honest we're going to be with ourselves about what the risks are.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess there is some good news in that, humans are resilient, and if we put our minds together, we can come up with workable solutions, which is good. But it takes, work from people like you to make us aware. I've heard you mention a study that you're working on called Farm to Table. And can you explain what that is and, where you're at with that one? Or Farm to Fork,
So
I guess is what
that
it's
was
called.
kind of a dream, actually, John. I'm not
Oh,
actually doing that study.
oh, you're getting my hopes up.
Right. I mean, what I would love to see, and somebody listening to this wants to fund me to do this, I will definitely do it. But what I'd love to see, because this all takes money, right?
Right.
What I'd love to see is if we take a few simple foods on the farm, a tomato, an egg, a bottle of milk, and so on, and actually measure what chemicals are in it then when we collect it. And if it's an organic farm, hopefully there won't be many that are endocrine disrupting. Of course, they're always chemicals. Everything's made of chemicals. And then see what happens as it goes to, it's being shipped. What's it being shipped in? Okay, what's the level of the chemicals during shipping? What's the level of the chemicals? If you're going to take that tomato and make it into tomato sauce, what happens when it enters the plant? When it leaves the plant, it's probably got more phthalates in it because it's gone through plastic tubing, right?
Mm.
It's going into a jar. If it goes into a tin can, it's going to pick up BPA. And so what happens to this product as we take it from the farm to our table? And our table, of course, will pick up the chemicals in the nonstick pans and in storage containers and so on. So along that path, where do the chemicals come in? What are they, and how can we avoid them? And one way we can avoid them, if you think about that whole process of that tomato is going through, or that milk is going through, that egg is going through, one way you can avoid it is to buy the product as close to the farm as possible. So if you can buy at a farmer's market where it hasn't been packaged, where it hasn't been processed, where nothing's been done to it, it's just put in a bag. If you want a paper bag, go buy your tomatoes in a paper bag at the farmer's market. You're not going to be picking up any chemicals. So that's the study I would love to see done, but it's, obviously you can't do it with everything, but for a few food items, it would be great to know where along the way specifically the chemicals come in and which chemicals and what can we do about it. So that's a study still to be done.
That would be an amazing one. So I assume you're a big fan of regenerative agriculture then.
Yes,
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
So am I.
Right. But I'm not a farmer and I can't talk about the details, but I know that, we want to obviously keep revitalizing our soil and revitalizing our water and our air.
Absolutely.
And planting in a way that's going to support chemical-free products.
Yeah. One wants to reduce their chemical exposure on a daily basis. What are kind of the top 5 or 10 things that you would recommend that they implement or avoid in their lives?
Okay, so food, I think, is a major source of exposure, right? We talked about that. And so to the extent that they can buy unprocessed food and eat it quickly and not store it in plastic or tin cans, the better off they are. That said, I want to add that not everyone has equal access or equal ability to do this, because if you are lower income, you are more likely to live in what's called a food desert. You don't have processed foods nearby. You don't have farmers markets nearby. You don't have availability of these lower, exposed products. So ideally, eat organic, unprocessed food, eat it as close to the farm as possible, and don't store it or cook it in pans that are non-stick or in containers that are going to convey exposure, right? So foods. Water is another source. And by the way, now we know all these things break down into microplastics, and those are in water and they're in our air. So foods, water, drink. Don't put this in plastic bottles. Don't drink out of plastic bottles. By the way, not all plastics are equally bad. So, that's another story we don't have time for now. But if you can, go to glass, or porcelain or some, product like that, you'll be avoiding exposures. And air. So we also get these chemicals through the air. And if we can use a HEPA filter, it'll help reduce our exposure. If you can leave your shoes at the door and put on some clean shoes, you keep this stuff out of your house. And avoid scent, things that smell, if possible, because they are going to contain these chemicals. And then if you have the the bandwidth to look it up, you can look up products, cosmetics, personal care products, laundry products, sunscreen that are safer, that have fewer chemicals. And a good place to do that is Environmental Working Group's website. They have a lot of consumer, areas you can go to. You can go to cosmetics, all of these things you can look up on Environmental Working Group and say, oh, I should buy this chemical instead of this product instead of this product, and I'll reduce my exposure. So those are some easy, relatively easy things to do if you have the time, the bandwidth, and the money to do them.
I appreciate it, Dr. Swan. Those are great. And I think, like I mentioned in the beginning, I think my wife was thinking I was cheating on somebody named Shanna, because I was like, Dr. Swan said we got to do this. We got to buy, we got to buy stainless steel. You're well known in our household. So it was a pleasure speaking with you, Dr. Swan. And I know you're extremely busy, so I appreciate you making time.